Awesome. Well, everyone, welcome to the Wednesday, August 9th Istio Combined Workgroup Meeting. First on the agenda, we have Whitney about the enhanced subgroup.
Hi, everyone. I'm sure everyone has heard about the enhancement subgroup from previous meetings, but I just wanted to tell the community that we are scheduling our first meeting as a subgroup for August 14th, 11 a.m. EST. I'm currently working with Mitch to get it on the combined working group calendar. I have an open question around how do we go about recording this meeting as a non-Googler. I'm not sure if there's a setting where we can do auto record once the meeting starts, and what is the process of like compiling those recordings as well.
So I guess I need some education here. So John, the combined workgroup meeting calendars, for example, this meeting and the next one, those are meetings that you created. So when the hit recording, the recording goes into your Google Drive folder. But can anyone create invites on that calendar? And if so, once they hit record, does it, first of all, does it require a Googler to hit record? And if so, does it go into your folder or does it go into someone else's drive?
I don't know where they go, but I believe that one, there's a very limited set of people that can even modify the calendar. And two, I think that somehow all the meetings need a Googler as the kind of admin that lets people in and whatnot, let alone. So it's not just starting the recording. You actually need someone from Google to be there to let people into the meeting, because it's tied to the Google, I don't know what they call it. The Google Workspace account thing.
Okay, so it is in a Google Workspace account.
Yeah, so that's why people like this need to get admitted into the call by Googler today.
Right. I mean, non-Googlers who try to join the meeting, we basically sit and wait until somebody from Google starts it.
Yeah, usually I hit admit. I didn't realize that. Okay, so let me look into that because I believe I have admin access to that account now. It used to be Craig Box, and see who the list of folks are. Whitney, who else is in the enhanced subgroup meeting, membership-wise?
Yeah, so this is actually open for all to join, but confirm attendance for this first one is Ethan and Imran. I believe Ethan should have permissions, but I'm curious if we want to think about how we can add more flexibility around the scheduling and recording of the meetings. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a work item there myself.
In the very short term, like for the first meeting that's in 5 days, I would suggest just doing it like this meeting and making sure someone who Google shows up. And then if that's a problem, we can find something.
Yeah, and I will make one other statement, and I don't know that it was good or bad, but I know one of the work groups for a long time was run by a non-Googler, and they actually had a separate, I want to say it was a WebEx meeting notice, so they could record them and get the recordings and post them. And it also didn't, and it didn't necessarily require a Googler to attend, but I don't know that we want to necessarily go down that route again, but it's been done in the past.
I think with the recent CNCF donation and all the work that Francis and Stuart and others have done, we should be able to get a meeting that can be kicked off by non-Googlers now, because we have a workspace that is not under the google.com domain. It might take a little bit of work, but I think we can get there. We did have a comment on timing with the 11 a.m. East Coast is 8 a.m. Pacific. Historically, we have not had a lot of engagement from the Silicon Valley crowd in that time slot. So it may be necessary, like maybe not for this week, but when you consider a recurring time slot, I would recommend considering something between, typically we've started at about 9 a.m. Pacific and tried to cut things off by noon Pacific, which is 3 p.m. Eastern. That puts it in core working hours for everybody in North America.
Thanks for that suggestion. I've been looking at like the folks who have committed to join in, and I was even considering even doing 2 kickoff sessions for both time zones next week. But we do have to like meet to figure out our cadence, and hopefully we can figure that out next week.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so Whitney, sounds like you will look into the schedule, and I'll look into the membership. But for this first one, since it's just in a few days, just make sure someone is there, say Ethan, some Googlers there to kickstart the meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. So John, goal 121 PSA.
Yeah, this is just information for everyone. So Go 121 launched, I think, yesterday. We are updating to it. I would encourage you to update locally as well. Typically, we try to not use new features for a couple weeks to give people time to update. This will be on both the 1.19 branch, which was cut like a week ago, and on the master branch. One quirk is that between Go release candidate and the official release, they made a breaking API change. So if you're using the release candidates, stop. It's basically dead code. It doesn't work anymore. So we're having an issue with that in our CI currently, where we previously were using the release candidate. So the build is currently broken. It should only last for a couple hours though. Because of the sequencing with them breaking it, there was no downtime path to upgrading. So that's all.
What was the change? What was the breaking change?
They added some new API, and then they changed the schema for it to take a struct instead of a bool.
Okay.
All right.
They also made this change that like was wild to me, that after every test, it just sleeps for 1 second. That like drove me insane yesterday, and it was only one day of dealing with it. There's a environment variable you can set that returns to normal behavior if you want. You can find it in the test and release channel.
Is that to deal with some flakiness?
It's supposed to be if you have some background Go routines running after all the tests complete, it can like detect races in them. But for Istio, it doesn't matter because we already have a check that detects that we have no background Go routines anyways. So it's totally worthless for our case. It's maybe slightly useful for other cases, but to me, it's just quite weird when your test that takes 1 millisecond sleeps for 1 second afterwards. Especially since we often run them in a loop to test for flakes. So.
All right. Anything else on this before we move on to the next topic? Okay, Whitney, RFC.
Yes, I just want to bring to light, well, to share with the community that we are currently working on driving telemetry API to beta, Leah and myself, and this is our working doc. We are not necessarily ready to present like our beta scope or anything as yet to the community, but because of a lot of the recent changes around open telemetry, ambience, and so on, I'm asking for comments around like the different design directions telemetry API could potentially take, as well as there's a section on open design discussions that I would love for folks that have the historical context and strong opinions to look at as Leigh and I begin our beta scoping, which we are hoping to kick off this week as well.
Okay, so So the ask is for the community to comment on this doc, or do you need more
Yes.
time to bake on this?
Please review our very early stages of it, specifically the design direction and open design discussion section, and comment, especially if you have any historical context around telemetry. Yes.
Very good. Anything else on this spec?
Nothing else.
Okay, well, so we've come to the end of our scheduled agenda. Does anyone else have anything to bring up? Okay, if not, let's just call this a short meeting.
Just a PSA, steering elections in this week, I think. So make sure you get your votes in if you haven't already.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, Kuat, I think you're on the call. Could we circle back to that item from last week around the injected header proposal? I think there is still some discussion there, and Kuat missed last week's.
Sure. I don't see any notes from last week.
Yeah, so maybe let's give quite a recap of what I think we discussed last week. And folks, please correct me if I'm wrong, right? So I think we kind of agree we should treat telemetry headers different from the other headers. I think for telemetry headers, we're looking at modify the code to add an environment variable to allow user to opt in to strip the X Envoy metadata headers when we detect the destination doesn't have sidecars, and we try to do this the best practice, the best effort to detect. For long telemetry headers, I think we're moving forward with what John's API PR. Well, John asked everybody to take another look. I think, John, you said you made some change regarding like the struct comments people made. So that's the summary. John, Costin, Greg, and did I miss anything?
I think that's accurate. One note on my PR, I saw Kuat had a ton of comments. I haven't had a chance to respond, but they all looked very, very useful. So I'll follow back on that. I did have a general question, like, is the general idea what we want on that, and we just need to fix the details, which I completely agree with all your comments, by the way. They're really, really good. Or is there more foundational issues with that still? I wasn't sure because we've gone back and forth a bit.
No, I'm regarding the OPR, right?
Yeah, my PR, not the unedited exchange stuff. That's separate.
Yeah, I think the API is reasonable. We just need to be. There's a couple of comments we need to be careful about specifying.
Yep. No,
the
yeah,
impact.
I totally agree about those. Those are really, really good, thorough edge cases and whatnot that I didn't think of. So.
Yeah, I have no problem with general. We just need to make sure it's good quality.
Cool. I will update those and then send it out to all the people that have had comments on it in the past. And we can move forward on that one.
Cool.
Okay,
yeah,
back
Francis,
to the meta
can
exchange
you,
one.
Yeah, can you record that? Can you record that for John's PR general direction is okay?
I did it. I already posted it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good. Yeah. I just want to make sure because John asked for confirm, and that PR been sitting there for very long. You know, I'd like to move it forward if we can. And then back to the headers for X Envoy metadata. But
yeah, so my main concern there is that I don't think you can reliably detect that the other side does not have a sidecar. So, like in principle, anytime you make a mistake there, you're breaking somebody, the other side. So if you cannot detect it reliably, this is a very dangerous feature. Because once you start enabling it, you're going to have breakages caused by breaks.
Yeah, that was the same point I was trying to make last week as well, that it is a trade-off of correctness of telemetry versus leaking of headers, right? There's no correct fix that's just better strictly, right? It's always a trade-off.
Yeah, which is also why we are not looking at this enable this by default, right? It's really user have to look into to opt in, and they probably will stay that way for longest time for our sidecars. By the way, we did discuss this is not an issue for ambient. Carsten.
Yeah, that was going to say as well. I mean, on by default for ambient because security trumps telemetry.
Ambient doesn't have this issue because it doesn't even use these headers.
Yeah, we don't have this issue in ambient. I actually validate that myself too.
So we remove baggage completely?
Baggage can be removed, but it's not the headers that we're talking about here. This is the X envoy peer metadata headers.
Yeah.
Lei?
Okay, perfect. Then it doesn't matter. Yeah, ambient is the one that needs to be correct.
Okay, so just to confirm, so the root of the difficulty comes from it's not reliable to detect the other end is Istio sidecar. I thought auto MTLS also depends on detecting the other end is Istio sidecar. So there there is some fundamental difficulty in detecting the other end is Istio sidecar.
Well, in principle, like our desire is that you should not be able to tell it easily, because we want to use standard protocols. You should be able to use, it should be easy to integrate with Istio. That means sidecar is indistinguishable from regular application.
But in practical terms, that doesn't really happen.
In practical, no, but it's just go counter to the goal, right? Because you can leverage the fact that it's not the same right now. But then once we start making it better and starting unifying protocols, we're going to have issues.
But by that time, ambient will be used and headers will not be used anyway, and there is no point of messing up for some hypotheticals that probably will not happen.
Well, the problem is that you're breaking something that works. So that it works the way it works, and if you change it, you're going to potentially break someone, right?
And we have the flag, so people can choose to keep the current behavior and be insecure, or they can enable it and then trade off.
Well, the problem is the flag is for you, not for the other party. Imagine two clusters, and one cluster sets it on, and the other cluster is somebody else, right? You're breaking the other cluster's telemetry, not your telemetry. If it was just you, it would be okay, but you're breaking others, right?
I mean, yes, but you don't leak your information. It's your information that would be leaked. So, you make a decision about yourself or your own privacy. And if, that's trade-off.
So one thing, go ahead, Kwok.
Well, I think it's okay to have a control to disable it. I just don't like having one flag that potentially can be enabled by default down the road.
You're right. We're not talking about enable it by default. I think we made it clear we're not going to enable this by default for sidecar. It's most likely going to be non-API, right? Which is why it's environment variable, because Keith made an interesting point last week. This is not controlled by API today. Let's not have it programmable by Istio API.
If you want to go first, I think your hand.
Yeah, Keith, we should.
Yeah, sorry, I zoned out for a second. So I think what I'm not clear on, and apologies for my ignorance here, but as far as the server's telemetry, what is broken from not having those headers? Is it original network? Is it that metadata about the region and such? Is like what part of the telemetry is broken from not having those headers?
Well, if you don't receive the header from your peer, somebody outside enable this flag, so they don't set this header anymore, then you don't get any peer metadata. So all the sources will be unknown.
No, let's not be so drastic. You don't get some peer metadata because you get it on namespace. You get, I don't know how we extract namespace, but hopefully we get it from certificate.
Yes, you get namespace and you get
yeah. There are three fields
ID.
that in the endpoint discovery, but other than those, the other labels will be missing.
Which, by the way, are the only fields you can trust. Everything else is more or less garbage because it's, you know, completely untrustworthy.
Well, what matters is that the UI will be broken. For whoever uses Tiali or whatever other UI, the UI is going to be broken. Our UI is not based on namespaces; it uses more detailed information.
So I think that goes to my part of my point from last week, is that there feels like there are the labels of the telemetry that we emit for cross-namespace communication or communication where the source might be unknown. That telemetry is effectively an API, and what we're discussing here is, part of that API is leaking when it comes to when we send traffic outside of the cluster because or outside of the mesh because we don't know what's a sidecar and what isn't. To your point about the UI breaking, it sounds like the UI is relying on those telemetry headers as part of their API, maybe or as part of the UI. To Costin's point in the chat, maybe the UI shouldn't assume that telemetry is always going to be available because there is going to be incoming traffic that we don't know what the source is. If we find an identity, though, we generally know it's mesh, the identity is trusted by the mesh. We know it's something within our mesh. Can the UI make sense? I would basically try to boil the problem down to, okay, what is the API we want to have? If we set that API, we don't want to leak it. What are we left with? And if the UI and some of the downstream tools need to adapt some of these edge cases where we're sitting across networks and things like that, then that's a separate conversation. As far as the headers, it sounds like we might know what the ideal is, and maybe we can work towards that.
The UIs are not the problem, I think. The UI perfectly handles, it displays the information we give it. If we stop giving it information about the traffic, it can only do its best effort to display it. It's not like it crashes or something if the info's there. It just displays what is to the user perceived as a wrong topology graph or whatnot, because we gave it bad information. If we said that we will give source and destination metadata as our telemetry, that's kind of our contract. And if we don't give them that, I don't know what we can expect them to do, right? They can't display that information.
Yeah, they cannot infer it. We don't provide IPs or any other additional lookup, so there's no way they can infer it. And I mean, it's a reasonable discussion for something not to rely on it, but we have projects that come to expect it. So we're going to be breaking downstream projects if we stop emitting metadata in more cases.
But we started the discussion with the assumptions that you have two clusters. In one cluster, the user makes the choice to not provide the information for privacy reason or whatever reason. And you are complaining that the other cluster suddenly doesn't get the information that the first party doesn't want to send. So that's working as intended, in my opinion. And also keep in mind that our goal is, well, hopefully it is to move to OpenTelemetry and to the new telemetry UI and standards. So we are debating something that will probably be obsolete at some point, for sure. Not clear 1 year or 2 years, but there is no long-term future for this feature. I mean, from ambient, OpenTelemetry, and all the other things.
So I agree we should provide a control to disable send and header between two clusters. The problem is that how to express it. I don't think any heuristics to decide based on some metadata in Envoy is going to work well. You can have routes that directly, access via IP. So at the very least, you need to know the CID ranges for the clusters if it's a flat network. We don't have that information anywhere.
So as far as I know, with normal default installation, we watch the pods. We get the label from the other side. We know even in multi-cluster that the label, for auto MPLS, otherwise it will be broken. So for all use cases that exist today in Istio, we are covered.
Well, if you're using direct IP address and there's no CID or mapping anywhere in our config, how do you even tell which cluster you're accessing? We don't have that detail. AutoMTLS doesn't work with direct IP access. It only works with EDS access, which is not always the case.
That's true. Pod to pod, I don't know how much. It's a choice. I mean, user make a choice to trade privacy versus, telemetry. I don't know what's the problem. If they choose one, we document exactly what they get and what they lose.
So again, we're sort of talking about, I agree with the goal. We need to provide this control. I'm complaining about the fact that the mechanism is not good. We cannot detect this easily. We cannot reliably tell whether the destination is a sidecar or not, within our cluster, outside the cluster.
So would you be fine with a control that says how we detect it, like disable metadata exchange for plain text or something along those lines, and acknowledging in both ourselves and in the documentation that it's not actually a perfect check if there's a sidecar or not?
Yeah, so like that, to having an actual API or per destination rule or whatever service entry that control it precisely is a much better version because it doesn't.
I'm not sure why. Yeah, I'm not
Please
sure
don't.
if we want this to be in an API because to a lot of user quad, this is a bug. They can't adopt Istio because we're leaking its sensitive information and their security team are not approving it. Them to adopt Istio because we're sending these X Envoy metadata that has potential sensitive information outside of the cluster. To them, they would just want a global flag to disable it.
Even just having a CIDR range for the IPs that should receive it is enough. But that's a config and it's an API, regardless how where you put it.
Yeah, I'm concerned about this being a flag if we never turn it on by default. Like the purpose of feature flags is that our slow rollout of a feature, not to be a long-term configurable API. And we've been making progress in that direction. This completely violates that. However, we do have a proposal to control headers in proxy config. So it feels like a nice fit there. And for folks that haven't looked at it in a while, it's no longer just an on or off for each header. So we could have something like metadata exchange enable for CIDRs or disable for plain text. Like we can have whatever fields we want in there. We can debate how it's enabled, but that to me feels like it would meet people's desires.
Right. So if user wants to be controllable, they can use proxy config to strip out telemetry X Envoy metadata headers, right? If user just want a global flag, not worry about this, because they're only on single cluster. They have like thousands of external services. They just want to turn it off. In that case, this feature we provide, they can easily turn, enable, disable, would provide what they need.
I changed my mind a bit. I agree with Quad. If we provide a flag, putting a CIDR range is not the end of the world. It's actually quite good. And it will be useful to have an install option that defines the CIDR. I'm strongly against defining an API because, again, our APIs are pretty bad, I would say, in many cases, because we take very narrow corner cases and turn them into first-class APIs and with minimal review, and then we cannot change. I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with API around this, but I don't think we only have feature flags. We have some install flags that determine how you want your Istio to behave. You want TLS, you don't want TLS, what CA you want. So those things are clearly installed and not under the user control.
I'm fine with non-API as long as we have a path towards API. And for the flag that you propose, just on off, there's no path. For the option of the CIDR range, I think there is a path.
So if we do CIDR range, I'm just trying to understand, would that be the CIDR range for the going egress traffic going outside, or would that be also a CIDR range for in-cluster, or could be both, I assume?
I We have an API for defining CIDR ranges for the multi-network, which we can extend. So I kind of agree. Basically, you'll have all your internal IP addresses in the CIDR range, which will be just 10.16/8, I believe, and 192.168. So basically, you can define all the IP ranges that are part of your internal network that you trust. And then everything not in that CIDR range is supposed to be egress or not trusted. It's not bad because you already have an API to define CID ranges for the purpose of multi-network. So we could extend it, and it's not, network policies are based on CID ranges and support CID. So it's not. If we want to have an API, defining an API that determines the boundaries of the VPC is not a bad idea. It's actually a very useful thing for many other things. As long as we don't try to make it too narrow, saying that this is only for telemetry or something like that. Just API to define boundaries of the network, for example. And then based on the boundaries, we can determine if we send headers or not.
Well, is there anybody asking for the CIDR range? Because I haven't heard of a user asking for it. I don't want to add stuff if we're just envisioning people were using it.
We definitely have the API already, so people have asked for it. And
I know for other purposes. I'm just saying for this X-Envoy metadata purposes. Especially this is only for sidecar. I don't know if it's worth a lot of effort to make this perfect. You know what I mean?
Defining the boundaries are actually very important for a lot of other things. I mean, it is also useful. I proposed it in the past for automatically adding an egress gateway in the path. And I mean, it's not bad to have information about your own network, which initially we wanted, long time ago, we wanted to get it from the API server, because API server can tell you the pod CIDR and cluster CIDR, and I don't remember what happened, why we didn't do it. But even in ambient and pretty much everywhere, having a way to define the boundaries is super useful.
So that would not, the environment idea, the initial, what we discussed last week, if we want to add a CEDA block, that would not work, right? It would probably have to be some type of configuration in mesh config. Unless you have another environment variable for the CEDA block, I'm just thinking loud how this would look like for the user.
I would even say if the user defines the CIDR ranges in the existing API, I don't know, maybe we need to add some label to indicate that all those labels are the boundaries of the network. Then we automatically don't send it because that's clear intent that you define the boundaries and that's your VPC. So basically we're saying we have the current mechanisms that define CIDR ranges and with an optional attached gateway, which is the API we have, which means if you're in this CIDR range, you are part of the mesh and use this gateway to reach this address. And if you don't specify or put a label, that means all those, you define the boundaries and you expect the boundaries to be enforced. For this, for other purposes, we'll discuss later. But we should think about it. I mean, it's not a bad idea, and it will come handy in many other cases.
Yeah, I'm worried about the CEDA block user are using not for this purpose and how, it would be, I think it would be confusing if we're also using for this purpose. What would that user experience looks like? And I'm also worried about if people are not specifically asked this for X-Envoy metadata, adding it as complexity and caveat to that.
Well, it's about how many people asking for this one. I know it's popular demand, but it's not like everyone asking for it. And it's okay to ask for complexity in configuration if it's a rare use case.
Yeah, so if you look at the proposal I put out, Claude, there was a lot of people asking about the leak metadata in one of the GitHub issues. I think it has like 20 plus thumbs up. So definitely a lot of people are interested in this. And I don't recall anybody said they want to combine this with CEDA block.
Or with destination rule. I mean, they didn't specify how they want to implement it. They just specify what they want. I mean, it's our choice how we expose it.
I understand, but Yeah, but I'm just saying I don't see that in the requirements. I wonder if somebody else see it or I miss it.
The one I usually see is the fact that when we define a service center for external destinations, we don't actually respect it being external. So we can also just somehow, don't, if there is a service center, just never send it there.
Yeah, but the user I talk to, they don't even want to create a service entry as they first onboarding into Istio. They want to just, enjoy some of the benefits of the mesh before they think out service entry or egress gateway and all that. So don't assume service entry is there. It sounds easy to create a service entry, but some of our users, when they have thousands of external service, they don't want to create service entry in the first go as they adopt a mesh.
Yeah, so that's exactly the CIDR use case, I think, because unless you know something about what's yours and what's not yours, you can't detect it. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to at least know which IPs are yours, which IPs are not yours.
I feel like there's kind of two parts to this discussion. There's how we decide enable or disable, which we talked about a variety of options, CIDR, MTLS, service entry, whatever. And then where we actually put this configuration, like is it in service entry, is it in proxy config, the headers thing. It's very clear we don't have consensus on how yet, but is there agreement that we can reach here that it should go in the proxy config as another field in the headers proposal?
So if we do it in proxy config, I have concerns. I don't think it would work for the users I talk to. The reason is, how am I going to determine in proxy config, I only want to strip the headers that I'm sending to out of mesh, right?
That's in the how, not the where. We will have a field in proxy config that says metadata exchange. And in that, we can have CIDR range, we can have strip for plain text, we can have strip if it's going to, I don't know.
Okay, not in your current proposal. Yeah, if we have something like that, I think it would work.
Yeah, I'm not saying where that,
okay.
What we put there, I don't know yet, but where it should go is with the other headers API, in my opinion. So that's what I want to see if we can achieve consensus on at least where it goes, and then we can debate over the details of how it's enabled or not enabled. Go ahead. I don't know, Lei, if you want to respond to this or a different topic.
Yeah, I have a question about how, right? So if we are going to implement this best effort proposal, are we going to depend on some data in EDS, for example, the endpoint metadata, to decide whether the other end is part of Istio, or are we going to use some other mechanism?
That's very much open for debate. I don't think we're anywhere close to consensus on how we actually do it.
Essentially, we don't have a mechanism to know whether the other end is part of Istio mesh, right? Because basically, idea is if you're part of the mesh, then I'm going to send you the metadata header. Otherwise, I'm just don't send the header, right?
Yeah, so we'll need to come up with some way to decide that, which I think we're all very much not in consensus on that yet. So we'll have to discuss that more.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Quad, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that might be overthinking this, because I mean our plan is really to not use these headers once we have the discovery. So this might just go away by itself.
But I don't know if it would go away for sidecar for a very long time. You know what I mean? Because who knows when the sidecar would have the discovery service.
We have it already. We just need to ship it and make sure it's working well.
Yeah, but keep in mind, people are running Istio in production, right? For that to reach production ready, it's going to take some time.
Yes, I understand it will take a year.
Yeah.
But any API change also takes a year. So we need to be mindful that whatever work we do here might not have some limited shelf life. So if we stop using these headers in a year, there's no need for this kind of control.
Agree,
but
the
headers for compatibility.
Go ahead, Joe.
Like even if we roll it out today, production ready GA instantly. We still need to send the headers because we may talk to older clients, right?
Yes, that's why we need to start using it, not necessarily only use it as soon as possible, so that all the old clients can fall back to the non-header version.
How about an option to just turn off metadata exchange completely? So user can choose to not send any headers, anything. And yes, they will have less telemetry, but that's a choice.
That's fine too. I mean, but we just need space for it, where to save. Right?
We actually already have a flag to do that, and I don't think most users want that. Like they don't want to.
It's a choice. I mean, they'll save money on storage. They'll save money on a lot of on memory usage and Envoy. I mean, it's a very useful flag to just.
They can turn off injection too, and they'll
I know,
but
problems, again, right? that will disable routing and other features, MTLS.
Sure, but like you just said, we'll disable all telemetry basically. Well, not all.
But the problem, the
Yeah.
user doesn't want that. I know that for sure. They still want in-mesh telemetry Envoy metadata, right? Else they lose metrics. Else, why would they adopt Istio? Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, what if we add this, peer metadata information in EDS?
And let's not complicate EDS because there are all kind of implications and costs. And,
EDS doesn't work because of what Lynn said. I mean, the general use case is that you don't have any config to hang on to. It's all just direct pass-through. There is no EDS. So that means there's no label you can attach to an IP or a host. I also wanted to mention I think as part of Ambient, we are trying to define a new header for this purpose, send metadata that's JOT based. So where does that belong? I mean, we'll have to define an API to send those headers somewhere. Maybe you should start thinking about that work and how it fits here so that we don't create two different APIs for the similar purpose.
I suspect that also goes into mesh boundaries, even for ambient, because even for ambient, you'll have the same problem and you'll still need some way to know if something is part of the mesh or not.
So I think that it's important to remember, and John mentioned this earlier, that we're not going to solve this problem with new behavior, because fundamentally we've got to support, keep wire compatibility with previous versions for upgrade. So I don't see how adding some new behavior is going to solve this immediate problem. I think in a situation where everybody's using baggage and ambience, right, it's not going to be as bad, but we still have to, if customers start seeing their telemetry disappear throughout an upgrade, it's not a great experience. So we need to figure out something for the interim. To illuminate here now, as far as mesh boundaries, I think that's maybe close. I like the CIDR idea. I think mesh boundaries in the realm of what we're discussing here, but I don't know. Like, everybody's got a different idea of what their mesh is, and I'm not too comfortable using a word that's that broad. Similarly, I also feel like getting into the weeds of metadata exchange in the API is going to could potentially lead to some misunderstandings, because I mean, how many customers are savvy or just in Istio enough to understand the nuances of metadata exchange? I don't even think we have docs for that. So that also feels too narrow of an abstraction. It feels like we're circling the drain around something in between the two, or we're not defining what are the boundaries of my mesh, because that can just fundamentally change at any time. When you add a new service entry, or you add a new cluster, a new site, whatever, right? A new VM, and you might not always know. And I'm not quite sure what that boundary is, but it feels like it's in the middle between what is my mesh and what is and where metadata exchange should happen. Now, maybe John has some thoughts here.
I actually just, I mean, I acknowledge your point, and I think it makes sense, but I disagree. Like, Istio has high-level APIs and low-level APIs, and this is intentionally a low-level API. The use case for the user isn't, I want to define some high-level concept like what a mesh is or isn't. It's specifically that header is sent on request, and I don't want that header to be sent anymore. Like, they don't care about higher-level constructs. They need to stop leaking that header because their security team's not going to let them deploy Istio, right? So in my mind, actually targeting the header specifically is the right level, even though it's low level, because they actually have a low level desire. And it's kind of the same with a lot of the other headers, like the server header. Like, sure, we could have made that into a higher level field, like identify who I am and be like kind of vague, but that's not what users see. Like, they see server Istio, get rid of that, like server header off, you know? So to me, it is low level, and that's actually what we want personally.
I think header, yes. Metadata exchange, when I say low level, I mean like that was like an implementation detail. Like maybe we're just pulling the covers back and like pulling the sheet back and letting people see more of the internals of how it worked, which might not be the worst thing in the world. But where I have some hesitation is around encoding an API around metadata exchange, because it feels so arcane to an average user to try to understand what's going on there. A regular header API, I'm more okay with. And the reason I mentioned setting the boundaries is because if you want metadata exchange within your mesh, you know, how do you define what's your mesh and what's not? So it's kind of almost a circular question. But the short version of this is I think I agree. I agree with a low-level API such as header removal. The term metadata exchange in an API feels arcane to me from a user UX perspective, but we can bike shed on naming later.
Lei, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm just trying to propose something in the middle. What if we selectively disable metadata exchange? For example, some customer complains that workload full is, disseminating these headers to unintended recipients. So then the customer can apply some kind of mechanism on the workload full. And only full will disable the metadata exchange. The other part of the mesh, the other workloads can still have telemetry, everything. So it's something, a trade-off. It's in the middle.
So user would be, well, the problem I see with that approach though is what if the full does talk to external service, which we want to strip the header, but what if full also call bar in the mesh, which the user still wants the header?
Yeah, I agree. That's a case. It's not a perfect solution, but it's some kind of mitigation, I guess.
I don't think our user likes that. Okay, so I think I agree with what Keith is saying. In the ideal world, I don't think the user wants to see X-Envoy metadata header. It's our internal implementation, right, to be able to exchange telemetry, and user cares about its metrics. They don't really want to see X-Envoy metadata header in their request, and they would not, it's absolutely not happy, when it has to go out of their cluster, and their security team definitely would yell at them. However, I think we're in this dilemma world where we can't reliably detect whether the target is have a sidecar or not inside or outside of the mesh. We still need to be configurable, and we still need to surface it as a configurable knob to our user. So I feel like that's the dilemma we are in right now, which I don't quite like, but I can't think of a better way.
But it's not such a big dilemma. I mean, life is not perfect. We can just have some flag because it's clearly there is a use case as you originally proposed and was discussed. Yes, it's not going to be perfect. We can document, hey, this is for users who are concerned about privacy more than they're concerned about telemetry. use it at risk, see how they behave, get feedback from the user, because that's the whole purpose of, and it's, it's an install option, so it's not going to be exposed or have a lot of backward compatibility. Yes, we can, it will be as imperfect as, if you have two clusters, in some cases you may lose some telemetry and you'll know why you lose it. And then iterate if ambient is not yet GA and people didn't move yet to ambient. So I don't think we need
I
to solve
totally
all the corner
agree with
cases.
you. I totally agree with you. I think we as a team needs to move on to what is the right intermediate solution for what user was keep debating, what's the right home, what's the right thing. So, because we could talk, I mean, John, your PI has been out there for a year. We could talk for another year about this if we don't decide on something.
Yeah, just to be clear, I have no intention to put this in my PR because it's so controversial. We'll absolutely merge my PR first, and then we can debate adding it as a follow-up. But I don't want to hold up that PR because it's been so debated already.
But in the meanwhile, like Greg, you're already writing some POC for the metadata header, X Envoy. So we want to see, last week we discussed the environment variable to be able to enable. I want to see if we can roll that out first for user to opt in and get feedback, and then we could potentially add a CEDA block if there's a lot of user requests. Does that sound a reasonable approach as how we could stage things out? At least we have some solution for users.
I have a problem with the flag because I honestly don't understand the impact of the suggestion. So if somebody asks me, I have a problem with header, and I tell them enable this flag, I don't know what's going to break. I won't have a more precise impact, boundary. The flag that's just heuristically guesses is likely to break something else, not just.
So we can tell them we are trying to detect based on whether it still can send mutual TLS to the destination. We're trying to detect whether it makes sense to send X Envoy metadata header, right? If we can't send Istio mutual TLS, it's a fair assumption, which we know it's not 100% right, but it's close to a good percentage of right that the target won't be able to process X Envoy metadata, so we're not going to send it.
Well, again, like if people asking me these questions, they usually have production cluster, and I don't want them to experiment on production cluster. I want to have a precise boundary of impact, so I know what's else going to break. And if it's just some global flag, it's difficult to say, right? I mean, yes, it might work. I mean, maybe they define some services. How do we know?
I think what most of the target for user onboarding to Istio, because if people are already in Istio in production, they already live up with this. They probably already have egress gateway. They already have, saying they can strip headers, when they set up service entry, egress gateway, they have fine control using Envoy filter or virtual service to strip headers. So there is a way to do that. But for people onboarding to Istio, this could be a blocker for them, right? Because we're missing a feature to allow them to gradually onboarding. In fact, like the user I talked to, they are interested in adopting egress gateway, and they could, and they know they can control headers through Envoy filter and virtual service with X Envoy metadata, but they just didn't have time to do it in day one when they onboard into Istio.
Well, the problem now is that if you start using it from day one, they will use it day 100, right? So now this becomes a permanent enabled by default flag for a lot of clusters. That's a big problem.
That's their choice, and that's their choice.
That's their choice. Yeah, that's their choice.
It's not our problem to force them to use telemetry exchange if they don't want to.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the issue is that they want to use telemetry, but they don't like seeing headers sent outside. It's not that they don't want to use telemetry, it's that they don't like seeing headers outside.
But they value their privacy more than they value the extra telemetry. They see some telemetry is used not as much as other people see. That's a choice that many people make anyway.
Well, yes, I mean, again, it's just a too broad of a hammer, right? I mean, cannot have one hammer that just says on-off here. That's my complaint.
And they can choose their hammer. What I mean, it's not our problem to. I mean, they make a choice to not use metadata exchange. That's not our decision to make.
No, I think it's not the fact that. Yes, you can start using it and maybe detect based MTLS, but people will also get blocked by MTLS, and they will define some plain text service with sidecar. And now we have an issue because you cannot have both this flag and this plain text service.
John,
So
do you want
we're-
to?
Yeah, I don't have any real evidence to back this up, but I feel like the most users would be mostly satisfied by a flag that says that metadata exchange is only over MTLS. I get it doesn't
Yes.
handle every case, but if I
Yes.
had to boil it down to something that's not 500 fields of the most, configurability, that's what I think would have the most value. That again is entirely just made up. I don't have any real evidence, but
No. I mean, I did talk to users. They can't adopt the Istio because of this. So, yeah.
So we are at the top of our. In fact, we are exactly out of time here. Can we make a decision here, or do we need to take this offline? What's the path forward?
I think most of us are leaning towards having this as a flag to our user, if I'm hearing correctly. Quad,
So
I think
actually-
you're not convinced yet.
I think we're really, if you have MTLS, you never need to send header, by the way, if you don't not aware of it. So the fact that we detect based MTLS is kind of circular. If you use MTLS with Istio, we don't need to send a header. We do it because we cannot detect easily that we have MTLS in the envelope.
So are you saying we just don't need the header at all? Because
Yeah.
for mutual TLS, we don't need it, and then for non-mutual TLS, we don't need it.
Yes,
Let's strip the header using global envoy filter. Should we recommend the user to do that? If they're not losing any metrics.
I recommend that we take a better look at how this works. And the idea, what I understand this is that if you have MTLS with Istio, you don't need this header at all. It will still work without the header.
So how can we verify that? We're done. I would love to verify that. Would that be verifiable if I do a test with my HTTP metrics with sidecar before the envoy filter to strip the header, and then after the envoy filter to strip the header, I look at the metrics. It's the same metrics when I make a call to HTTP, or is that?
You can try with MTLS and there's not configure that header, that filter. I don't think you can strip it with envoy filter here. It happens before envoy filters apply, I think.
You can strip a header using envoy filter. I've done that.
Yeah, but we're talking about processing headers, and I don't know at what stage it's been stripped. It might be stripped after.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes before we need to jump to the other meeting. So shall we take this offline?
Yeah, so Quad, let's follow up offline, because if we don't need it for mutual TLS, I think we're done. Let's just strip the header, provide a solution to user to strip the header globally.
Well, again, we've done that in the past, and the problem we broke someone. So for whatever reason, I don't remember, but we have two fallbacks, one MTLS and one HTTP. And if you just use MTLS, then it used to break someone, I think, years ago. So we have both mechanisms at the same time.
Okay. Okay, let's follow up offline and report back to the team next Wednesday.
Sure.
How does that sound?
Okay.
All right, thanks so much for the discussion.